If you think you know what fear feels like, wait until you hear what happened inside Cell 7B. Before we descend into the darkness, smash that subscribe button, because once you start this journey, there's no turning back. Drop a comment if you dare. Now, let the nightmare begin. The steel door slammed behind Daniel Marsh with a sound that seemed to echo into eternity. February 12, 2019. Red River Supermax facility, somewhere in the desolate plains of Montana. Daniel wasn't an inmate. He was an investigative journalist for the National Observer, and he had just voluntarily entered the most feared section of one of America's most brutal prisons, administrative segregation, Block D. The locals called it something else. They called it the pit. Daniel's editor had been skeptical. You want to spend 3 days in solitary confinement? For a story? But Daniel had been following a thread that nobody else seemed to notice. Over the past 18 months, 7 inmates in Block D had committed suicide. 7 men, all in different cells, all with no prior history of self-harm. The prison administration called it unfortunate. Daniel called it impossible. Warden Gerald Hutchins had agreed to the experiment under one condition: Daniel would experience exactly what the inmates experienced. No special treatment. No early exit. 72 hours in an 8x10 concrete box, just like the men who had died there. The guards who escorted Daniel didn't speak. Their faces were blank masks, eyes forward, movements mechanical. Daniel noticed their name tags. Morrison. Foes. He tried to memorize them, tried to remember that these were people, not automatons. But something in their synchronized movements made his skin crawl. Cell 7B was exactly as he'd imagined and nothing like he'd prepared for. Concrete walls painted industrial gray. A metal bed frame bolted to the floor with a thin mattress that smelled of disinfectant and something else, something organic and wrong. A steel toilet in the corner. A fluorescent light that hummed with a frequency that immediately set his teeth on edge. No windows. No clock. Just silence that felt thick enough to choke on. The door sealed shut. Daniel heard 7 locks engage, one after another. 7 locks for 7 dead men. He sat on the bed and pulled out the small notebook he'd been allowed to keep. His plan was simple: document everything, interview guards during meal times, and look for patterns that the official reports had missed. He clicked his pen and began to write. Hour 1. Temperature approximately 65 degrees. Lighting harsh, constant. Notable feature? He stopped. On the wall across from his bed, barely visible in the fluorescent glare, were scratch marks. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Carved into the concrete with something sharp, something determined. Daniel stood and moved closer. The marks weren't random. They formed words. Don't sleep. His heart rate picked up. He ran his fingers over the gouges. They were deep, desperate. How long would it take to carve letters into solid concrete? How much pain would your fingernails have to endure? A sound crackled above him. Daniel looked up to find a speaker mounted in the corner of the ceiling, next to a camera with a blinking red light. A voice emerged, distorted and flat. Subject 847, you are being monitored for research purposes. Comply with all instructions. Meals will be delivered at designated intervals. Do not attempt communication with adjacent cells. Subject 847? Daniel felt ice crystallize in his stomach. He was a journalist. He had a name. He had credentials. Why were they calling him a subject? Wait, Daniel called out. I need to speak with Warden Hutchins. Silence. Hello? This wasn't part of the agreement. The speaker clicked off with finality. Daniel returned to the wall, to those carved words. Don't sleep. He noticed something else now, smaller writing beneath it, scratched with even more frantic energy. They change you when you sleep. They put things in your head. I hear the clicks. I hear the... The message ended abruptly, as if the writer had been interrupted, or had lost their mind mid-sentence. A meal slot in the door scraped open. A tray slid through. Daniel hadn't heard footsteps approaching. He checked his watch. 6 hours had passed. 6 hours that felt like 20 minutes. On the tray was a sandwich, an apple, and a small paper cup containing 2 pills. One white, one blue. Daniel picked up the cup and examined the pills. No labels. No explanation. He called out again. What are these medications for? I didn't consent to any medications. No answer came. He set the pills aside and bit into the sandwich. Turkey and cheese, institutional and tasteless. As he chewed, he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it. Rhythmic. Mechanical. Coming from inside the walls. Daniel pressed his ear against the concrete. The clicking was clearer now, accompanied by a soft whirring. It sounded like machinery. Like something moving behind the walls, something with purpose. He pulled back and looked at the camera. The red light blinked steadily. One blink every 3 seconds. He counted. Consistent. Watching. Then the light in his cell flickered. Twice. And went completely dark. In the absolute blackness, Daniel heard the clicking grow louder. Closer. And beneath it, another sound. Breathing. Heavy. Wet. Right outside his door. But when the lights flickered back on 3 seconds later, Daniel was staring at something that made his blood turn to ice. On his bed, placed carefully in the center of his notebook, was a single syringe. It hadn't been there before the lights went out. He hadn't heard the door open. He hadn't heard anyone enter. But someone had been inside his cell. Daniel's hands trembled as he lifted the syringe. It was full, the clear liquid inside catching the harsh fluorescent light. No label. No markings. Just like the pills they'd given him. He turned toward the camera, holding the syringe up where they could see it clearly. What is this? His voice cracked. What the hell is going on? The speaker crackled to life. Subject 847, elevated stress levels detected. Consume prescribed medication to maintain baseline psychological parameters. I'm not Subject 847. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm a journalist and I know my rights. Failure to comply will result in corrective intervention. The fluorescent light began to flicker again. Slow at first, then faster. The clicking in the walls intensified, now coming from multiple directions. Daniel backed into the corner, syringe still clutched in his fist. His mind raced through possibilities. This was supposed to be supervised. This was supposed to be safe. He'd signed waivers, yes, but nothing that authorized forced medication. He thought about the 7 dead inmates. Had they been given syringes too? Had they refused like he was refusing now? The lights stopped flickering. In the sudden stillness, Daniel heard something new. A voice. Faint, muffled, coming from the wall behind the toilet. A human voice. New fish, don't take the blue one. Daniel pressed himself against the cold concrete. Who's there? Cell 7A. Name's Marcus Webb. You're in 7B, right? The death cell? How are you talking to me? The guard said no communication. A raspy laugh filtered through the wall. The guards say a lot of things. There's a ventilation gap behind the toilet. Took me 3 months to find it. You got maybe 2 minutes before they pump the gas. Gas? What gas? Compliance gas. Makes you suggestible. Makes you forget. How long you been in? Daniel checked his watch, but the numbers seemed wrong. 6 hours. Maybe 7. You sure about that, new fish? Daniel looked again. The watch face read 11:47 p.m. But that couldn't be right. He'd entered the cell at 9 a.m. That would mean 14 hours had passed, not 6. He'd lost 8 hours somewhere between the sandwich and the syringe. Listen to me, Marcus's voice grew urgent. They're not studying isolation. They're testing something else. Behavioral modification. Memory manipulation. I've been in Block D for 2 years. I remember things that haven't happened yet. I forget things that just occurred. Last week, I woke up with scars I didn't have the day before. That's impossible. Yeah. Then explain the syringe that appeared in your locked cell. Daniel had no answer. He stared at the needle in his hand, then at the camera watching him. Behind that lens, someone was monitoring his every move. Someone who could enter his cell without a sound. Someone who wanted him medicated. The clicking in the walls stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was worse. Marcus whispered through the gap. They're coming. Whatever you do, don't let them take you to the White Room. That's where the others went before they hung themselves. That's where they break you. Marcus, I need you to tell me exactly what. The lights went out again. This time, Daniel heard the locks disengaging. 7 metallic clicks in rapid succession. The door swung open. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, blinding him. Hands grabbed his arms, strong and gloved. He tried to resist, but there were too many of them. Subject 847 exhibiting noncompliance. Initiating Protocol 7. Daniel recognized the voice. Guard Morrison. But it sounded different now, clinical and detached. They dragged him out of the cell and into a corridor he hadn't seen before. The walls here were different, painted pristine white instead of institutional gray. Medical equipment lined the hallway. Heart monitors. For stands. Something that looked disturbingly like an operating table. Where are you taking me? Daniel struggled against their grip. I'm a citizen. I have rights. I want to speak to Warden Hutchins right now. They said nothing. Their synchronized footsteps echoed in the white corridor. Left turn. Right turn. Through a door marked, authorized person only, Project Lazarus. Project Lazarus. Daniel's journalist instincts kicked in despite his terror. That wasn't a standard prison program. That was research terminology. They pushed him into a room that made his stomach drop. It was circular, walls covered in soft white padding. In the center sat a chair that belonged in a dentist's office from hell, complete with leather restraints and a metal apparatus designed to hold the head completely still. Around the perimeter of the room stood 7 filing cabinets. Each one labeled with a number. 1B through 7B. 7 cabinets. 7 cells. 7 dead inmates. Guardshin opened cabinet 7B and pulled out a thick folder. Daniel caught a glimpse of the contents. Photographs. Brain scans. Behavioral reports. His blood froze when he saw the name on the top document. Subject 847, Daniel Marsh, baseline readings established February 12, 19. Baseline readings. Established today. But he'd only been here for hours. How long have I actually been here? Daniel's voice came out as a whisper. Morrison finally spoke, and his tone carried something that might have been pity. You've been asking that question for 3 weeks, Mr. Marsh. Every day you ask the same thing. Every day we reset you. Every day you forget. The room tilted. Daniel's legs gave out, but the guards held him upright. 3 weeks. That was impossible. He remembered everything. The editor's office. The drive to Montana. Entering the cell this morning. Except morning had been 14 hours ago according to his watch, and his watch had to be wrong, except what if it wasn't? The journalist who came before you lasted 17 days before the protocol broke him, Chen added, consulting the folder. Ethan Rodriguez. Started asking the same questions you're asking. Started finding the same clues. Cell 5B. We had to classify his death as suicide, but between you and me, he knew too much by the end. Daniel's mind reeled. Another journalist? How many people had Warden Hutchins lured into this nightmare? They forced him toward the chair. Daniel fought with everything he had, but 3 men against 1 yielded predictable results. The leather straps bit into his wrists and ankles. The head apparatus locked into place, immobilizing him completely. Above him, a circular device descended from the ceiling, bristling with electrodes and tiny cameras. A door opened behind him. Footsteps approached. A new voice, smooth and educated, filled the room. Good evening, Daniel. I'm Dr. Raymond Carver. I've been overseeing your participation in Project Lazarus. I must say your resilience is remarkable. Most subjects don't retain fragmented memories past the first week. Daniel could only see the white ceiling and the descending device. What are you doing to me? Answering a question that's plagued neuroscience for decades. Can we isolate and remove specific memories while leaving the rest of the mind intact? Can we modify behavior at the neurological level? Thanks to subjects like you, we're very close to perfecting the process. This is illegal. This is torture. This is evolution, Mr. Marsh. Imagine a world where traumatic memories can be erased, where violent criminals can be rehabilitated at the synaptic level, where PTSD becomes a footnote in medical history. The applications are limitless. Unfortunately, the research requires a certain moral flexibility. The device touched Daniel's skull. He felt cold metal points pressing against his temples, his forehead, the base of his neck. A high-pitched whine filled the room. "The beauty of our work," Dr. Carver continued, "is that you'll wake up tomorrow morning believing you just arrived. Fresh, hopeful, ready to investigate. And we'll do this dance again. We've refined the process significantly thanks to your repeated participation. You're helping us perfect the reset sequence." Daniel tried to scream, but a guard had placed something in his mouth. A rubber bite guard. They'd done this before. They knew he'd scream. "Sleep now, Subject 847. Tomorrow, you'll be Daniel Marsh again. The journalist who just arrived at Red River Supermax. The man who thinks he's here for 72 hours. The man who doesn't remember the 21 days we've already stolen from him." The whine grew louder. Daniel felt electricity surge through his skull. His vision went white. His thoughts scattered like birds fleeing a shotgun blast. The last thing he heard before the darkness took him was Marcus Webb's voice echoing from somewhere far away. 34 days, new fish. I've been counting for you. 34 days you've been here. Don't let them make you forget again. But the electricity surged one final time, and Daniel Marsh forgot everything. When his eyes opened, he was back in cell 7B. The steel door had just slammed shut behind him. The guards were walking away. He checked his watch, 9:07 a.m. February 12, 2019. He pulled out his notebook to begin documenting his first hour in solitary confinement. The page wasn't blank. In his own handwriting, growing increasingly frantic across 34 pages, was the same message repeated over and over. They erase you every night. Count the scars on your left arm. That's how many days you've been here. Don't trust the watch. Don't trust the calendar. Trust the scars. Daniel's hands shook as he rolled up his sleeve. 34 thin white lines ran down his forearm. Daniel counted the scars 3 times, his finger tracing each raised line. 34. 34 days of his life, stolen and erased. He flipped through the notebook with mounting horror. Page after page of his own desperate handwriting, documenting things he couldn't remember. Dates. Names of guards. Descriptions of the White Room. Details about Dr. Raymond Carver and Project Lazarus. On page 17 he'd written, "They're not just erasing memories. They're implanting new ones. I remember a childhood dog named Chester. I never had a dog. I remember my father's funeral in 2015. My father is alive. What else have they put in my head?" Daniel's stomach churned. If they could make him forget, could they make him remember things that never happened? How much of Daniel Marsh was actually real? He found the ventilation gap behind the toilet and pressed his mouth close. "Marcus? Marcus Webb, are you there?" Silence. Then a different voice. Younger. "Marcus is gone. They took him to the White Room 2 days ago. Haven't seen him since. You're the notebook guy, right? The one who keeps figuring it out. Who are you?" Cell 7A. "They call me Subject 842. I think my name was Kevin. Kevin something. I can't remember my last name anymore. Can't remember my crime. Can't remember my family. All I remember is this cell and the tests." Daniel pressed his forehead against the cold wall. "How long have you been here?" "I stopped counting at 90 days. That was a long time ago." 90 days. 3 months minimum. How many memories had they stripped from this kid? How many times had they reset him? "Kevin, listen to me. I'm getting us out of here. I'm a journalist. People know I'm here. They'll come looking." A bitter laugh echoed through the gap. "That's what the last journalist said. He got real far, made it all the way to the warden's office before they caught him. They made us watch what happened to him on the monitors. They wanted us to see. To understand what happens when you resist too much." Daniel felt his resolve harden into something cold and sharp. He returned to his notebook, reading faster now. On page 23, he'd drawn a crude map of Block D, 7 cells in a row, all part of Project Lazarus. But there was something else. An annotation in the margin. Basement level exists. Heard footsteps below my cell at 3 a.m. Maintenance access through shower room. He kept reading. Page 29. Carver mentioned funding from military black budget. DARPA contract? This isn't about rehabilitation. This is about creating soldiers who follow orders without question. Erase the conscience, implant the mission. Page 31. Guard Valdez showed hesitation today. Looked away when they prepped me for the chair. Possible ally? Or trap? Daniel heard the meal slot scrape open. A tray slid through, but this time something was different. Beneath the sandwich sat a small piece of paper, folded tight. Daniel snatched it up before the camera could get a clear view. The note read, "Shift change at midnight. Morrison and Chin go off duty. I'll leave your cell unlocked. You get one chance. Basement level, server room 3. Evidence is on the mainframe. Upload everything to the internet or we all die here. This is the only help I can give you. Destroy this note. V. Those." The guard who'd looked away. Daniel memorized every word, then tore the paper into tiny pieces and flushed them down the toilet. His heart hammered against his ribs. One chance. If he failed, they'd reset him again. Or worse, they'd do what they did to Rodriguez. He spent the next hours preparing. From his notebook, he learned that he'd managed to smuggle a small USB drive in his shoe during one of the early resets, before they'd started checking more carefully. Daniel felt along the sole and found it, a tiny piece of plastic that represented his only hope. He'd been smarter than he remembered. His past self had been planning this. At 11:52 p.m., Daniel pressed himself against the door, waiting. The fluorescent light hummed its monotonous song. The clicking in the walls had stopped hours ago, as if the building itself was holding its breath. 11:59 p.m. Daniel heard footsteps in the corridor. Morrison and Chin, ending their shift. Their voices faded. Silence fell over Block D like a shroud. 12 a.m. A soft click. So subtle Daniel almost missed it. He tried the door handle with trembling hands. It turned. The door swung open into darkness. The corridor lights had been dimmed to emergency levels only, casting everything in blood-red shadows. Daniel stepped out of cell 7B for the first time in 34 days without guards restraining him. He moved fast, following the route he'd memorized from his notebook's crude map. Past cells 6B, 5B, 4B. Behind each door, he knew, was another victim. Another person being systematically destroyed. He wanted to free them all, but the note had been clear. Evidence first. Exposure was the only thing that could save them. The shower room door was unlocked. Inside, exactly where his notes indicated, was a maintenance hatch. Daniel pulled it open and descended a metal ladder into darkness. His feet hit concrete. He pulled out a small penlight he'd kept hidden in his sock and switched it on. The basement was a maze of pipes and electrical conduits. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. Daniel oriented himself and headed east, toward where server room 3 should be. His internal clock was screaming that he was running out of time. How long before the next guard checked the cameras? How long before they noticed his empty cell? He found the door marked, State Route 3, Authorized Access Only. It was locked, but the seal was old, institutional. Daniel had learned to pick locks in college while researching a story about campus security. His hands remembered what his reset mind had forgotten. 30 seconds later, he was inside. Banks of servers hummed in climate-controlled precision. Daniel found the main terminal and plugged in his USB drive. The screen flickered to life, requesting credentials. His notebook had prepared him for this too. On page 32, he'd written a username and password, obtained during a previous escape attempt. Admin, Lazarus 2019/pass, Carver Neurocortex 7. The system accepted them. Daniel was in. Files upon files. Video footage. Medical records. Financial transactions. Correspondence between Dr. Carver and Department of Defense officials. Daniel's hands flew across the keyboard, copying everything to his drive. 40%. 50%. The upload crawled with agonizing slowness. A video file caught his eye. Subject _847 _1 into mp4. He clicked it. His own face filled the screen. But this Daniel looked different. Eager. Excited. Helvet. The date stamp read January 9, 2019. More than a month before the February date he remembered. Daniel Marsh, investigative journalist for the National Observer, his recorded voice said, "I'm here voluntarily to experience administrative segregation and document the psychological effects for my upcoming exposé on prison reform." January 9th. They'd been doing this to him for over a month, not 34 days. The scars had lied. Or he'd lost count during one of the resets. Another file, subject to _842_Heaven_Brennan_Herman_Tension.mp4. Daniel clicked it with dread. The video showed Kevin, the kid from cell 7A, strapped into the chair. Dr. Carver's voice narrated clinically, "Subject 842 has undergone 73 complete memory erasures. Neural plasticity has degraded to the point where personality reconstruction is no longer possible. Subject retained for control group observation. Cognitive function now at 42% of baseline. 73 erasures. They destroyed that kid's mind 73 times. The upload hit 90%. Daniel heard footsteps above. Heavy boots. Multiple sets. They discovered his escape. 95%. The door to the server room burst open. Guards flooded in, led by Dr. Carver himself. The doctor looked more annoyed than surprised. "Really, Daniel? We've played this scene 12 times now. You always make it to the server room. You always think you're going to expose us. And you always fail. 98%. 12 times." Daniel kept his body between them and the terminal. "My notebook only goes back 34 days. We reset the notebook too, obviously. Do you think we're amateurs?" Dr. Carver adjusted his glasses. "You're remarkably persistent. It's one of the qualities that made you such an excellent test subject. That drive to uncover truth, no matter how many times we bury it." 100%. The download completed. Daniel ejected the USB drive and clutched it in his fist. "It's over, Carver. Everything's copying to cloud storage right now. In about 30 seconds, every major news outlet in the country will have access to your files. Project Lazarus is finished." Dr. Carver smiled. It was the saddest smile Daniel had ever seen. "Oh, Daniel. You really don't remember, do you? Let me show you something." He gestured to a guard, who brought over a laptop. Carver turned the screen toward Daniel. It showed an email inbox. Daniel's email inbox. The sent folder contained dozens of messages, all addressed to news outlets, all containing zip files of evidence. All dated from the past month. All ignored. "You've exposed us 17 times, Dr. Carver said softly. You've sent evidence to the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, even international outlets. Do you want to know what happened? Nothing. Because Red River Supermax is a black site, Daniel. It doesn't officially exist. We're funded through compartmentalized military budgets. The inmates here are either dead on paper or never existed in the first place. And you? You've been listed as missing since January 12th. Your editor thinks you went off the grid chasing a lead. No one is looking for you because everyone assumes you're doing what journalists do." The USB drive felt impossibly heavy in Daniel's hand. "So send your evidence," Carver continued. "Upload it everywhere. No one with the power to stop us will care. This is the cost of progress, Mr. Marsh. This is the price of evolution. In 5 years, what we're developing here will prevent more suffering than you can imagine. War veterans will forget their trauma. Abuse victims will reclaim their lives. The applications are endless. And the people you're destroying to get there? Kevin Brennan? Marcus Webb? Me. Regrettable casualties in the greater good." Carver nodded to the guards. "Take him back to 7B. Full reset. I think we'll try a different baseline this time. Maybe someone less investigatively inclined. Perhaps a teacher. Yes, a teacher researching solitary confinement for an educational program. That might last longer before the pattern recognition kicks in." They grabbed Daniel's arms. He fought, but it was useless. As they dragged him toward the door, he made one last desperate move. He threw the USB drive with everything he had, aiming for the gap beneath a server rack where it might be lost in the cable management chaos. It skittered across the floor and disappeared into shadow. "Find that," Carver ordered, "and increase his dosage. I want a complete personality restructure this time." They hauled Daniel back through the basement, up the ladder, through the red-lit corridors. The white room waited. The chair waited. The device that would scramble his brain like eggs waited. But as they strapped him down, as the electrodes touched his skull, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in 34 days of subjective memory. Because even if they erased him, even if Daniel Marsh ceased to exist entirely, the truth was out there. 17 copies of evidence floating in the digital void. Maybe everyone had ignored them so far. But it only took one person, one journalist, one hacker, one whistleblower with a conscience, to grab that data and run with it. The machine hummed to life. Dr. Carver's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Goodbye, Daniel Marsh." "Hello, Subject 847. Let's see who you become this time." The electricity surged. Daniel's last thought before the white light consumed him was of Kevin Brennan, the kid who couldn't remember his own name. At least Daniel had tried. At least he'd fought. At least someone would remember. 6 months later, a systems analyst at the Department of Defense was conducting a routine audit of black budget expenditures. Buried in the files was an anomaly: 17 identical large data uploads from an IP address registered to Red River Supermax, a facility that officially didn't exist. Curious, she downloaded one of the files. Her hands started shaking halfway through the first video. By the time she finished reviewing the evidence, she'd already made copies. Sent them to her own encrypted drives. Contacted a journalist friend who specialized in military oversight. Within a week, the story broke. Within a month, federal investigators raided Red River Supermax. They found Block D empty. The cells were spotless, recently cleaned. No inmates. No equipment. No evidence of Project Lazarus beyond faint scorch marks on concrete walls where someone had tried to erase serial numbers from heavy machinery. In Cell 7B, they found only one thing: a message scratched into the wall with what must have been fingernails worked down to bloody stumps. "My name is Daniel Marsh. I was here. I existed. Remember me." The warden, the guards, Dr. Raymond Carver, all vanished. The investigation went nowhere. Red River Supermax was quietly decommissioned and demolished. But the story survived. The evidence survived. And somewhere in a facility even more secret than the last one, a man who used to be Daniel Marsh sat in a white room, unable to remember his own name, but absolutely certain of one thing. He'd been someone who mattered once. He'd told a truth that needed telling. And even if they'd taken everything else, they couldn't take that. The scars on his arm had reached 147 before he stopped counting. But every night, in dreams they couldn't quite erase, he remembered typing on a keyboard, uploading evidence, fighting back. And that was enough.